Hello again, and welcome back to the composition vlog. I'm back in the studio, as you can see, and it's been quite a busy couple of weeks since I last filmed, so I've got a few things to talk about today. Probably the biggest thing that's happened is that we had our latest Bastard Assignments gig, and so we performed Aides Memoire there at Asylum in Peckham. I think where I last left this, I was expressing doubts about performing it in the dark, in spite of our fairly successful test performance at Snape Maltings, that I just wasn't sure whether I wanted to carry on with that or not. There are technical issues behind this as well as artistic choices, one of which is that the venue we're in, Asylum, doesn't have the theatrical lighting that we had in Snape, and that thing about having me in a spotlight, which worked very well in the theatre situation in Suffolk, didn't really turn out to be possible because we had to hire in the lighting rig, and it wasn't going to be really feasible to get that very tight light on me so that the others could be in the dark around me. Also, we had a much smaller stage space to work in. So I'd been thinking already about sort of a hybrid solution, which is what I went with in the end. Josh had been suggesting that we leave the lights off and that I join the others as sort of part of a herd, really, and that I be speaking the text and taking photos with them and just doing everything that they did. We tested this out. I had reservations, and at the end of it I still wasn't convinced. Part of this is just because having to focus on the movement and the taking photos and the text, I felt the text really suffered, and it didn't feel like I was fully committed to the text and that it was getting my whole attention. And what I really wanted to do with the text was to have it draw people's attention to the field recordings, to that sound, and to really listening to the piece. So I went back to my hybrid idea, but what I did quite like were there were a couple of moments where in the herd we were sort of nicely rammed together, and it felt like a very pleasing image. And so what we ended up doing was that I started the piece on the stage and just doing my narration, and gradually the guys came on and clustered around me. So they were doing their herd thing with me in the middle, but I was not part of it, and so I just kept talking and they were sort of moving side to side, right around me, and then sort of dispersing while I just stood there and kept on talking. I really liked how this worked. Obviously I haven't seen the video yet, and because I was in it I couldn't see it at the time, but it felt like a really nice balance of a very natural approach with just a hint of theatre to acknowledge that it was a theatrical situation. It avoided that feeling of being acted, and I think that piece, it's so grounded in my memories, my recordings. I somehow felt it was really important to have me as me in it, and visible in it as well. And I think that was the right choice to make. And so I had a camera, I had my film camera, and I did take photos during the piece, but only there's a section in the middle that's where the field recordings sort of drop out, and so it's just camera sounds. And then again at the end, when the field recordings end, it's just camera sounds at the end. So in both those sections I was taking photos, same as the guys were. But the rest of it I was just doing narration, so I wasn't trying to narrate and take photos at the same time. I was able to just fully focus on what I was saying, and it just came across a lot more relaxed, and I think hopefully more engaging. We got a really good response to the piece. So that was really nice. Several people said that it really spoke to them, so that was good. So everything was fully theatrically lit right up until the end, and sort of at the very end of the piece we did a gradual fade out after because I had the guys coming on from the back and then going off sort of towards the end, and then I finished the piece and the lights go down and then I go off and join them, and then the idea is to be taking photos in the dark with flashes and those sounds happening, just to finish the piece. So that felt like a nice sort of compromise, I guess, of the best possible sort. The radio mics worked really well. I was absolutely thrilled with that. That was really good. I ditched the idea of using phones, which has been in sort of both performances we've done before, that the photographers switched from real cameras to phones and taking selfies and things. It was quite a cute idea, I think, but in practice it was just muddled, and because everyone's phone reacts slightly differently and there weren't really enough people on stage to make that a feature, it just sort of looked uneven. The sounds didn't come across because we didn't have radio mics for all the phones as well, and that would have been awkward. So to get them to make a sound that can be heard, you have to then be up close to the radio mic that's on the camera. It was just messy. It was so messy. Yeah, so I ditched it. And we just used proper cameras all the way through. I did, however, leave the camera sounds on the soundtrack. So there are sounds of my phone on the soundtrack as well as more camera sounds. This was to kind of beef up, I guess, that element and make it not so sparse. I think the cameras can hold their own, but I was still a bit concerned about not really knowing what the light levels would be. Asylum has fantastic natural light. It's stunning, but the problem with it is that as summer comes in, you actually can never tell how light or dark it's going to be by the time it gets to your piece. And so it could have been twilight, it could have been pitch black, it could have been bang on sunset with the sun streaming in through the windows. And I was just a little concerned that if the cameras did slow down, it might be sonically lightweight, really, and I felt it was better to have more sounds than fewer. In the end, I'm glad I did, because while the cameras worked perfectly well in the lighting, it actually did reach near blackout once the lights were off, and the film camera actually ceased to function at all, which was exciting and a little stressful. So as I walked off, it was sort of taking photos, and then it was sort of like more and more button presses to get it to do anything, and then it wouldn't focus, and then it just wouldn't take anything because it just got too dark for it. So this was the first performance of Aides Memoire where the spin-off piece, which is called POV, has really had a chance to be anything at all. So this is a piece that's made up of the photos that are taken in the performance, and yeah, I'm really pleased with some of the things that came out of that. I think with the ones that were taken at Snape, because we were all in the dark and everybody's camera had to have the flash on, yeah, a lot of them came out really clear and crisp and just really dull, to be honest. The nice thing about Asylum was that because you had these theatrical lights glaring at you and everything else was sort of twilight, there's some really interesting sort of blurred effects and really strange things going on with the light, and then a few things in there where the flash has gone off and things are really crystal clear. So there's a really nice mix of different shots. So I'm putting a few of those up here. I have no idea what I'm going to do with this. I don't know whether it has the scope to be anything on its own. I was just really curious to see what came out of it, and yeah, so I formalised it by giving it a title. So the other thing that happened this week was that we spent the whole of Thursday in a basement recording studio at the BBC studios at Maida Vale, recording a session for Late Junction. Now Late Junction have this thing they do sometimes where they take two artists who don't know each other and work in completely different fields, and they just kind of lock them in a studio for a day and say, ooh, let's see what happens. So that was us, and we were paired with an American electronica artist who goes by the name of Swan Meat, and she does some really cool stuff, and we had a fantastic time. It was so much fun. And we've heard the recordings back, and yeah, some of them are just completely bonkers. It's going to be great. So that's being aired at the end of May, and really excited about that. But I think the thing that was significant about that for this vlog is I took along a bunch of stuff, or we all took along a bunch of stuff, because we knew we were going to be improvising. And one of the things I took along was my viola, which has remained unplayed pretty much for about 12 years. Yeah, it's got some problems, poor dear. It needs all new strings, it needs much love and attention. Basically the strings are very, very old, and if I turn the pegs they're liable to snap. So basically it's untuned, has been for quite some time. So I think I mentioned a couple of episodes back that I'd been tinkering around with some sounds on the viola that were inspired by a cello piece by Amnon Wallman. Yeah, so I was really happy with that, and I didn't quite know what to do with it. I mean, I'd originally been planning it for a solo piece, but this seemed like a good chance to take it along and see if it could be anything. So I was essentially going along with an instrument that I hadn't played in over a decade, with one sound that I knew I could make on it. But it was just such a great atmosphere, and we were doing so much bonkers stuff, and the attitude towards the improvisation was, well, we don't really know what we're all capable of, so let's just go nuts. And I ended up doing quite a lot of improvising on the viola, and I felt I got some really great sounds out of it. I really enjoyed playing that much more than I enjoy improvising on the flute, which I frankly don't really enjoy at all, and I feel that I have a very limited repertoire of sounds, and so I've got like 3 sounds that I just do over and over again, and I find that very frustrating. But I found with the viola that the more I played it, the more sounds I came up with, and the further I was willing to push it, and I didn't feel I even touched the sides of what I could have done with it on Thursday. So on Saturday I thought, well, let's keep going with this. I really enjoyed that, but also to test out, it's one thing to be improvising with a bunch of peculiar sounds with your mates in a basement with excellent acoustics. It's quite another, I think, to pull it out and try and do something convincing just on your own in a room. And so I was curious to see how that would change if it did, and whether it was something I could think of as being a solo thing for me, something I could just stand up on a stage and do, perhaps. So I pulled it out and I started making some sounds. And that was good fun. I was really unconvinced by my first few attempts, but I felt that sort of one of the later versions, while I wasn't very happy with it, I felt there was something there, but it needed more variety, and I ended up overdubbing with a second improvisation and sort of trying out some slightly different techniques, which has ended up being sort of a piece, which is nice. So I've whacked that up on SoundCloud, and I've given it the name Scratch, which is very appropriate, I'm sure you'll agree. I'm thinking I might do some more of these and just keep experimenting with that and see how I feel about it. Yeah, I do intend to get new strings, I have to say. Viola fans out there, no violas were harmed in the making of this recording, but I do need to get new strings at some point and learn how to tune it and try and remember how to play it properly as well. It's quite liberating, actually, not really knowing how to play it. Yeah, maybe the less said about that the better, but nevertheless, it's been really fun and interesting, and I'm going to continue. I mentioned last time too that I was starting a new piece for Plus-Minus Ensemble for the end of May. And so I just had a texture at that point, and I really do still only have a texture. But I was thinking more about the video part for that and what that would be like, and so I did a little bit of drawing in my book to try and get in my head what that video part is going to look like. I've kind of got this idea of video of drawn lines that's kind of the same line but kind of not the same line, that might be in a slightly different position, and sort of cutting them together so that you end up with, yeah, this sort of mismatch of shades and positions, and that how that goes together might then relate to a sort of a rough rhythm for the instruments. I need to do some practical tests on that. I'm hoping I can get to that next week, because this week's kind of full, because I do need to actually start doing practical tests for that and just stopping thinking about this. But I was sort of thinking about how to get that texture into sort of more a form that would become an actual piece, and sort of thinking about this idea of the drawn line that I want in the video and how that could be incorporated as a gesture in the actual performance. And I'd been looking at Christian Marclay's manga scroll and thinking about the format of the scroll, and so thinking that there could be like a roll of paper that's very, very long, and every now and then a performer gets up and draws a line along it. It's kind of likely to use what is becoming my old standby of amplified drawing, to have a contact mic on the paper. And I did have this crazy idea that there could be some sort of live video involved that then kind of overlays the pre-existing video, and I think that's just going to be too technically complex, and I don't really know why I wanted it. I think it was just like ooh, I could do that. So I don't think that's going to come to anything, but you know, it was an idea. Yeah, so again, not much progress, but ideas are happening for that, so that it's not dead yet. So that's about it for the fortnight. Thank you very much for watching. As always, if you've got any comments or questions, please leave them below. And I'll see you in another couple of weeks. Okay, thanks. Bye.